Fathom is one of the most successful SaaS products in recent years. I know it's one of my favorite, and I bet you've seen their note taker in at least one meeting every week. But how did a small team with 0 salespeople build one of the fastest growing, highest rated tools in SaaS today? By delaying sales and doubling down on product. Welcome to the Learn It All podcast, the show for today's leaders who want to get ahead and stay ahead, because we believe great leaders aren't born or made, they are always in the making. I'm your host, Damon, 2-time best-selling author and CEO of Learn It, a live learning platform that has helped to upskill over 2 million people over the past 3 decades. Today, I'm joined by Richard White, a 3-time founder who has turned frustration with meeting notes into an AI engine that replaces note-taking with clarity, context, and fewer follow-up meetings.
At the end of the day, a lot of our products were just forms, or they're web apps, right? Now with AI, you have a totally different way you got to build it. It's like we're building it backwards from what's technically possible.
In our conversation today, I'm going to ask Richard to share his thoughts on why solving for retention before revenue was Fathom's secret to early success, how moving fast, even without all the answers, can be your biggest startup advantage, the hidden risk of following expert advice that's stuck in the past, why onboarding is the real first impression and how it fuels word-of-mouth growth, and what it really takes to ship AI features that are more than just good enough. When did you realize that you weren't just going to be a builder or a coder, but somebody who's going to keep founding things?
I think I founded a bunch of things when I was, I would say founded, but I built a lot of stuff when I was in school, actually in high school, made websites back in the late 90s and sold fake Oakleys to students at high school. And I think I actually knew when I tried to get my first real job and realized, I'm kind of a terrible employee, that I realized maybe I need to stick to this startup game. And so I think I had 2 stints where I was an employee right after college, and then ever since then, just been founding companies.
What was it about being employed that you just couldn't stand?
If I didn't understand why we were doing something, I probably wouldn't do it. Right? It was, I would be really good if you gave me all the context of why we were building something, and then I'd build something pretty good. But I think I was just if I didn't get that, and most managers didn't want to spend the time to do that. They're like, just go build this thing, shut up and build it, right? Kind of thing. Our clients are asking for it. That's all the why you need sort of thing. And that wasn't sufficient for me, it turned out.
So now that you know that, how have you been a better leader by being able to articulate that why better?
I mean, that's the number one thing I feel like I'm supposed to do for the company, right? Is share context and make sure everyone knows why we're doing the things. Almost from the 5 whys, what are all the way down? Why are we building this feature? Why does that feature matter? Why does that metric matter? Et cetera, et cetera. Because I'm obsessed with how do we get the most out of having a small team? And part of that's having really senior folks that are, really autonomous and really, ship code fast in the case of engineers. And they do their best work when they, like me, really understand what impact their work's going to have. So I spend a lot of time on that.
Super critical, because especially these days, people want to feel like they have purpose and they have belonging, and that what they're doing matters, that they're not just paycheck players. So let's just take it back a little bit. So you were there for the early YC scene. What did being around that environment and being in the mix teach you about, or did you learn from building, timing, and just maybe even just staying in the game?
Yeah, it was interesting. So I grew up in North Carolina. I tried to do a bunch of startup stuff while I was in college, while I was a teenager. And I think at some point I really struggled to find people that also wanted to work on startup things. Actually, most people around me were super happy with the stable paycheck sort of situation. And I got very fortunate that through a cold email, I ended up working with a company in the first batch of Combinator, which at the time was based in Boston. I then for working with them, flying up to Boston, working at the office with the founders. I worked with the people that went on to found Twitch. But the founders of Reddit were in the same room as me. And honestly, that in some ways saved my life or saved my career in some ways, because I think I probably would have given up on the startup path. But then I found my tribe of people. And these folks, I didn't have to convince them to take risk of doing a startup. They were kind of like me, that doing a startup was the default assumption. I couldn't imagine doing anything other than building something. And so I think it was really cool. And I mean, it was an amazing community of folks that I'm moving out to San Francisco with about 20 years ago. And it was kind of during the .com post-bust lull, right? And kind of reminds me actually of the last couple of years here, right? Post-2022, where you had, all these companies kind of go bust and everyone's like, tech boom's over sort of thing. And that's what I feel like all the real builders kind of get to work. And so that was what was great about that cohort of people I came here with about 20 years ago is they weren't driven by getting rich. They were 100% driven by just like, this thing should exist in the world and I'm going to build it. And, you need a fair amount of hubris to do that. But like, it was just this really genuine, like, I just love to build stuff kind of mentality amongst everyone in that group that was really infectious.
So from that opportunity to be around those types of individuals and, being part of it, has it helped you in return kind of give back to others who want to be founders and have conversations with them?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of, I try to give like back as much as possible, right, with the day job, right? Because a lot of the best things have happened have been, like I said, cold emailing other founders, joining their companies, them helping me out. And so like that network, that like founder to founder network is just so, so powerful. I think it's also, I'm a pretty competitive guy. So it's pretty good because you're like kind of frenemies. Like I'm competing with all my friends too in a fun way, right? Like, and so I think it really pushes each other to be better. And I'll say I learned a lot from watching these guys, right? I think a lot of these folks had a level of self-confidence that I originally only could aspire to when it comes to like trusting their own instincts. A lot of the most successful people I know in their mid-20s had such supreme confidence in their own instincts and decision making, which was mind-boggling to me at the time, but produced really good outcomes for them. And so I think I've learned a lot just watching how all these pretty successful people operated even before they had the success to really validate what they were doing, if that makes sense.
My background, I was a baseball player, and that's what I always thought I wanted to be, but I even kind of lacked some confidence there a little bit. What advice do you have for somebody who maybe has some good ideas, but maybe they lack the confidence to take it to the next level?
I mean, I know one trap I think I fell into early in my career is kind of confusing experience for wisdom. Or for intelligence, really, and it's, when you're in your mid 20s or even your early 30s and you meet folks that have been in the game for 10 more years, they sound really smart, and, you have this almost want to like, oh, wow, I should not only do what they say, but I should always seek out someone that's been there, done that. Right. But you tend to find that like a lot of that stuff tends to sometimes be like that advice tends to overrepresent the way things used to be. Right. And so I think the best folks, there's always this thing like, don't ask for advice, ask for stories. And then integrate those stories into your own kind of experience and figure out what they mean, right? Don't just take them as gospel of it's always done this way, right? Because all the best folks, they would hear other people's stories, but then they personalize it to them and they make their own decision. And I think what I did a lot of was the opposite, where I just like spent a lot of time, every decision I made, all I needed to talk to 3 experts on this. And the most successful friends I had didn't do that, right? They did some of that, but they also were like, I'm going to just move forward because it seems like the right thing to do. And I think it turns out in the startup game, speed is almost the most important resource, right? Time is the most important resource, even more than like, there's very few decisions that you have to get exactly right? Just getting them directionally correct and moving quickly is by far like game theory optimal.
And I totally agree with that. You can't sit around, think about perfection and have your 7-year business plan. You'll just get passed up. The other thing, Richard, I like what you said is, you can't ask for a couple people for advice, but at some point you got to, these are just concepts or people's opinions. I had this one friend of mine, I think he's a legendary lean construction guy, Paulo Napolito, who said, even stop reading books after a while, and start coming up with your own point of view and perspective and find an empty space and do things different, especially if you want to get in and create something, whether it's disruptive or even, 10x better than what's currently out there.
I think that's really true too. I mean, the other reason why I like being in kind of these founder cohorts, which is why we actually did YC again with Fathom, was because I think there's so much you can learn from other folks that are just like trying new things from first principles. By the time there's a book that says, here's how to do this thing marketing wise, it's usually probably out of date, right? Like, because that's how, quickly the world moves. You gotta have to zig when everyone zags type of thing, right?
Yeah. And so Fathom is your third startup, really, right? Kiko, and then if I said that right,
UserVoice. Yep.
UserVoice. In my research about you, what I really like is how you call UserVoice your finishing school. So what were some of the most important lessons you learned there that you then pivoted and used getting into Fathom?
I mean, I do think, so I ran this company UserVoice for about 12 years. It's kind of a platform for product feedback. You think like Reddit for product feedback. And over those 12 years, we kind of did everything because it was like a tough market, a good, but maybe not great product sort of thing, like when I was there. And so you had to execute really well. And we had kept trying everything to try to make this thing grow, right? And so we did PLG before they called it PLG. And then to the end of its lifespan, where I was there, end of my tenure, it was an enterprise business. In between executives, I ran every team. I ran the marketing team for a minute. I ran the sales success team for a minute. I ran the sales team for a minute. And so it made me a very good, like, T-shaped entrepreneur, right? My background is product and engineering and design. So I'm like really deep in that. And go back 15 years before UserVoice, I was really deep in that, but I didn't know anything about sales, marketing, you name it. And that was I think that really held us back, because I was so deferential to folks. I kept looking for people to come in and white knight those things for me, because I was just like, I had in my head, I can't figure these things out. Now, after doing that for 12 years, I'm not a great head of sales, but I know enough to like know, okay, here's a good V1 of how to build this, and here's what a good first leader looks like, things like that. So I think it makes you really, if you can be kind of cross-functional, you know enough about how all the little things, all those departments work, you can make quick decisions. You can figure out who to hire. Like, it just allows you to move so much faster than when you have to delegate all that stuff, because you just are in your head that like, I don't know anything about this. Like, I can't do anything about it. It turns out it's so much easier for if you're technical to like learn some of these other disciplines than the reverse, right? So if you're coming from a technical background, you already have, I think, one of the hardest things, which is like this deep technical experience. Trust yourself that like sales is rocket science. Yes, you're not going to do an A+ job, but in the beginning, you don't need an A+ job. You need like a C+ job, right? And same thing goes for like a lot of these disciplines like marketing and customer success.
You don't need an A+ job. You just need to get yourself out there and just kind of test the market and see what people think. Now, I've got several buddies who are, fractional CROs, and one of their biggest frustrations tend to be working with technical founders who really know nothing about sales. And they always think that products can sell themselves. What advice or feedback do you have for technical founders who maybe have that perspective?
I think there's a tendency for technical founders to undervalue the human relationship, right? They tend to undervalue things like customer support. They tend to undervalue things like sales. And again, I think sometimes if you're kind of if you're like maybe the classic kind of slightly antisocial, technologist architect, you yourself undervalue these things, right? And so it's asking you to do the thing that's like the hardest thing to do, is just empathize with people that are not like you, right? And so I think, my general thought on a lot of these things is go and see, like go try it, right? And the same reason I think like most companies always benefit from their first round of funding, maybe not their 10th, but their first round of funding, like, because, you've got more resources to do something. So what I'd say to them is like, understand that the way most people, not everyone buys the same way. And in fact, there's probably 2 or 3 major archetypes of how people buy. Some people hate talking to sales. Some people won't buy without talking to sales. And so if you want to build a big business, you're going to have to build them up. You have to build a business that can cater to all the different ways people want to buy.
I think that's a great point. So let's talk about Fathom. And I mentioned to you before we went on air, I'm a big Fathom fan. Our team's been using it at Learn It for several years now. What made you decide that Fathom was needed?
I mean, I think it was right before the pandemic. I was just on Zoom meetings, and I was doing a lot of, meetings with customers, and they're back to back, and I'm talking to someone, and I'm hurriedly typing out some like, shorthand notes and spending a lot of time stressing out that I'm missing some key quote, looking at those notes 2 weeks later and saying, gosh, I don't remember which meeting this was. And more importantly, like trying to share those notes with my team and realizing how much was lost in transmission, right? Like I'd have an amazing conversation with a prospect or a customer, and, they have really positive or negative reaction to something we're building. 2 weeks later, I put together the synthesis, and it's like 3 bullet points on the page, and the team just kind of shrugs their shoulders. And so it seemed obvious to me that like, gosh, this is like such a bad experience from all angles. Notes no one likes taking them. They're not effective for reading them. I ran our sales team for a minute. I mentioned it, UserVoice. And I remember the number one thing I struggle with as a sales leader is like trying to get good notes out of my team. Some people write too little. Some people wrote way too much, actually. But even when people wrote a lot, I still found myself being like, yes, but what did that person actually say when they said they're going to buy before the end of the month, right? Can I hear the tone in their voice? And so just in general, I kind of came around to this belief that like, gosh, notes are this weird artifact that we don't really need anymore. We have technology can do this for us, right? We can record the entire meeting. We can now transcribe it at pretty high quality. And in 2020, we didn't yet have LLMs that we do today and AI. but I was pretty confident that that was coming, based upon what I knew from my YC network about what was happening at OpenAI and companies like that. And so we really bet this whole company on, you know, everyone hates taking notes. Everyone would benefit from having an AI in the meeting that's like recording and taking notes for you. And even though the AI doesn't exist to do this today, we think it'll exist in a few years. And so we're going to start building the product in that direction. So when AI does show up, we'll have built all the hard parts: reliable video recording and transcription, cross-platform, et cetera, and we'll get to kind of drop in AI like a new engine in an old car sort of thing. And that's fortunately exactly what happened, right? We ran out a window that was closed and it opened right as we were kind of jumping through it. And so it's been very gratifying to see that.
And I like the story about how you brought on, I think it was one of your first sales reps, and you said, "Look, there's nothing for you to sell here for a while. I just want you to come in and an experience and kind of get a feel for it." Talk to a little bit about how that worked, because most people put revenue as key number one when you're first getting off the ground, especially after you raise money.
I tend to like to take the key things that make up a business, right? Like retention, acquisition, monetization. And I like to kind of attack each one of those in order when starting a new company. And so when I looked at Fathom, I thought, well, the hardest thing here is, and I think for most companies, is retention. It's actually getting a product people use day in, day out, or week in, week out. So let's do that first. Let's really focus on that first. Once we nail that, great. Now we're going to actually focus on how do we get more users in, and I think about distribution channels and stuff like that. And once we have all of that, now we'll focus on monetization, because it's really hard to know what people will pay for before you know who you can acquire for how much and whether they're going to stick around, right? And I also think there's always this pressure, to like get revenue immediately. But I'm also a big fan of like, I'd rather show no metrics to investor than a bad metric. And when you try to tackle all three of these things at once, you're not likely going to get, you're going to get C- across the board, right? So try to take these things one step at a time. And then, I think, the other thing I did with Fathom is like, I noticed from my experience with UserVoice, the value of, people building relationships, right? And hearing from customers firsthand. And again, I think it took 12 years working at another company for me as a technical founder to really believe in that. And now I believe in it so much that we did a lot of things in the early days of Fathom where we would pay people to talk to us. Hey, you just had your first call with Fathom. We'll pay you $25 to jump on a 10-minute like Zoom call and tell us what you thought. And at some point I realized like, I can't continue to do this. I don't have the skill to do this. Gosh, let's bring in someone who can. And so this woman, Amanda, who was my kind of top SMB rep and manager at UserVoice, I was like, can you come in here and basically, I'm going to ask you to be a CSM because we have nothing to sell for at least a year, maybe two. But I want you to get in, really get to know the product, get to know our users, get to understand the problems they have. And at some point, we'll flip the switch and we'll start charging money for it. And you'll already be so ramped up because you'll know exactly how this thing works and what people like, what people pay for. And you will help me figure out actually what we should charge money for. And so that was a bit of luxury we had because as a second-time founder, I could raise enough money to hire people maybe well ahead of when we needed them. But it worked out fantastic. I think we actually had a team of 3 salespeople, quote unquote, that weren't selling at all for over a year before we started monetizing. But when the market shifted in 2022, we immediately had to start monetizing because now the market's giving us this feedback. We need revenue. And now I was very fortunate to have, I've already have 3 ramped up salespeople on my team. They just haven't been selling anything. And so we just were like, great, it's time to go sell. So worked out really well.
Are you still doing health checks with your customers now that you have? What I mean by health checks are having somebody like Amanda or somebody who's been a customer of Fathom for a while and saying, where are you finding value with us? Or does that help with your roadmap as far as features and benefits even?
Yeah, I mean, we still try to build out a lot of these kind of feedback loops, both in the product and through service. We invest a lot in customer support. I think that's a place where companies underinvest in, oddly, because it's not grand scheme of things that expensive to do great customer support. And it's a huge, I think, differentiator in the market. We still have all the things like, how's your first call go? That goes back into our support team now. We don't pay you $25 anymore for that feedback. But if you say anything negatively, like, something doesn't work, and immediately get to escalate to our support team. We do kind of NPS surveys throughout the life cycle. Anything that comes up negative there goes back to our support team or our success team. And so I love building these loops that kind of do a lot of like one-to-many kind of engagement, right? Because 19 out of 20 people are probably gonna have a great experience. If 1 out of 20 have a bad one, great. We want to like kind of be drilling test wells all the time to figure out where those folks are, get them into some sort of support or success experience so we can kind of remediate that. And then, a lot of learnings from that get fed back into the product roadmap.
You also have to be aware that you can't please everybody all the time. So not saying you should discard somebody's feedback because all feedback is data, but some people you just can't make happy. So if you have 29 out of 30 happy, maybe you can look at the case. As far as growth has gone for Fathom, how does it look differently from your first 1,000 users to the hundreds of thousands you probably have now?
I love this question because I think this is another like key startup insight, which is like everyone thinks you have one channel. It takes you from like the first user to the millionth user, right? And I actually think our experience has been, the first 1,000 users was literally me going to my network on LinkedIn and just harassing people into using Fathom, right? Like, hey, will you try this out? Like, I think someone might offer money, like, hey, I'll pay you $50. I think we also used like interview panels. Like we went on some sites where you could hire people to do user testing. And I just like, hey, I'd actually pay you like, you're a sales rep, you're a CSM. I'll pay you $50, $100 to try to use this product in front of me. And then some of them kept using it, right? So first 1,000, very scrappy, a lot of LinkedIn messaging, badgering my friends, hiring interview folks. And honestly, I think out of the first 1,000 people we got signed up, or maybe about 800, we got to about a group of about 50 people that are using it day in, day out. And that was actually like cool. I was like, great, that's like win. We like won the first stage, right? And so, we had 50 MAU when we technically launched. But I felt very confident because those folks had, were kind of really high repeat users. And then we got very fortunate that Zoom was launching kind of like a marketplace right around when we got started. That's pretty lucky. There are not many big companies are launching marketplaces, and even less of them generally let startups that have no users or 50 users like we did basically participate in the launch. And so that got us probably the first, the next 10 to 50,000 users sort of thing, right? And then from there, it really just spread kind of word of mouth or virally because you bring Fathom in your meeting, people have to kind of explain why it's there. Oh, it's taking notes from me. Do you want a copy of these notes too? I can send you the notes. And that was the thing that got me excited about this business in the beginning. One was I think there's a business model that really fit where it's like we could give this product away for free. And if we can give it away for free, then it can spread virally because it's like the most naturally viral thing I can think of, right? It's in front of people that aren't users constantly. And so that was our whole thing. But viral models are tough because you got to get to like 10,000 users before that like Flywheel really kicks in. And so that's where kind of like getting involved with the Zoom marketplace was so helpful.
And having a freemium model is great, but even with a freemium model doesn't mean that people are going to activate it and continue to use it because sometimes they feel like they don't even have skin in the game. So you have to stay on them to show them the value to be able to start leveraging it.
I think there's two things. Like one is I think everyone underestimates how good your product needs to be like viral. Like it's not good enough for just like it does the job. It needs to like be like really lovable and blow people's minds, right? Like, and so we intentionally, I think, spent a year building this before we ever launched it. And the whole thing is like, can't launch something that just kind of works. It needs to be really, really good at day one. And then we're fortunate with Fathom. It's like your aha moment happens pretty quickly, right? After your first meeting with Fathom, when you get those notes and you see how good they are, you're like, oh gosh, I guess I never need to take notes again, right? And that's the big aha moment. And it happens, sometimes within 30 minutes, right, of sign up, right, whenever your next meeting is. So I think we're very fortunate in that regard that's true. But I think back to your point, it's like it's not enough just to make it free. I think free is a superpower. I think especially if it's a really good free plan, I think a lot of people try to like cheat and be like, oh, we have a free plan, but it has, it's clear you can't use it for more than a week or a month or something like that. And I think most consumers are pretty savvy about that now. And like, no, they're honestly, they're skeptical, right? Because they've seen this model a lot. Oh, it's free. Yeah, sure. But if I keep using it, it's going to become paid. We're not like that. We were like, no. In fact, we had no paid plans for the first 2 years. Right? No, it's free. Use as much as you want. And to me, that's really important because if you want word of mouth, there's a huge difference. I saw this at UserVoice between me recommending something that's like truly free and me recommending something to you that costs $50. So if it costs $50, you're less likely to recommend it to your friend because if they don't like it, then you feel like you cost them $50. If it's free, it's like you gave them a gift. And also what I've seen psychologically, it's like if I give you a product that's free, you as a user feel this level of like you want to it's like a social contract where you feel like, oh, I want to do something nice for them. They gave me this gift of like this free product that I get so much value out of. I'm going to go rave about them to other people. If you go look at our G2 scores, we have which is like Yelp for for software, we have a 5.0 rating and we now have 5,000 reviews, which is insane. In fact, we were the highest scoring product across all of G2 last year. And it's because of this mechanic where we just give away so much value in our free product that it leads to people wanting to write reviews, wanting to tell their friends. And that builds this like really amazing kind of snowball effect. But it only works if you really invest in making it it's like really high value, right? Great customer support, great experience, and it costs you nothing. And so that's a real winning combination.
Well, a couple things that stood out to me with Fathom, and I'm not a paid sponsor here or anything, but number one was the immediate note, the email you get with like the takeaways and action items. When I saw that, that was one of the very first things I was like, this is cool. And we switched over from, I mentioned Chorus over to Fathom. The second one was that your team did an excellent job on onboarding because, even if it's free or it's inexpensive, if they're not using it or not using it properly, I mean, what's the use? It's frustrating. So as a learning and development company, we spend a lot of time making sure we onboard our customers because if they're not, logging in and taking classes, then they're not going to renew and they're going to have a bad experience. Now, one other thing that one of my sales reps brought up before this call, this interview today was it makes us look like a trusted advisor with our customers because a lot of times, Richard, we'll get on calls with clients. He says he does this all the time. And they'll ask, hey, what is that recorder? And we'll say it's Fathom. By the way, and what you guys did was brilliant. Here's like a referral code or a link where they can just go in right there. And so we're adding value automatically to our customers or prospects by giving them a tool that we all need because we all have meetings we're on all day long.
Yeah, I think a lot to unpack there, but I think onboarding is also a place companies underinvest in. Like we spent 9 months of me and I think 1 or 2 engineers on our team just every day improving the onboarding process to make it really, really good. I think that's overlooked. We also do a lot of stuff where like we can't fix everything, but we notice, you hit some bug or you hit, some experience, like maybe you kicked the bot out of the meeting. We have all these emails we call proactive support emails where it's like, if we notice something goes wrong, we'll actually email you and say, hey, we saw this went wrong. Here's how to fix it. If you have any questions, let us know. And so I think I'm really happy to hear that like you guys had a really good onboard experience because I think that is so important to these things and often overlooked.
How do you, though, as a founder, keep the patience to do really focusing on the onboarding or some of the fixes when you probably get a lot of pressure from people saying, look, we have to get this to market or we have to generate more revenue. How are you able to, manage that without moving forward?
I mean, that is one of the harder things, right? It's like the balance of sanding down rough edges versus investing in big new features. For me, it's less of the tension between like people saying we need to drive more revenue and more of like, there's so many things we can build with AI now. AI has come so far in the last 18 months. 18 months ago, the state of the art for us was, giving you great meeting notes and action items and stuff like that. And now the state of the art is we're rolling out things that can, an AI that can watch every meeting your team has had and, write internal documentation, answer questions, right? So we did show me every moment that we ever seen Fathom where someone had like a negative reaction to our pricing or had a really positive reaction to one of our features or, write me a 5-page article explaining the history of this feature at Fathom or blah, blah. And so right now the tension for us is there's so much you can now do with AI that you couldn't do 6-9 months ago, sitting on top of this data set of your company's meetings versus going in and like sanding down the rough edges. The only way I've seen to do it is basically just to dedicate X number of engineers or percentage of your engineering bandwidth to, we're going to dedicate 20 to 35% of our engineering bandwidth at any given time to just small UX fixes, right? We've tried it sometimes where we had less engineers. When we had like 3 engineers, we would do a couple big features. And once we get a big feature done, we spend a month on, great, it's like a little fix this month. Now that we're a little bit larger, we just tend to have like, okay, there's a few teams that are dedicated to a lot of these small fixes. But I think it's really important. I think that's also something companies don't invest in. It's like, well, the feature works for most people. And it's like, so we're not going to invest in it. And so I think it has to requires you from an executive level to say, no, we're always going to invest this percentage of our resources into fixes.
One of the things I heard you say is we suffer through, especially since COVID, meeting inflation. Talk a little bit for those out there who aren't using Fathom, how by leveraging a tool like Fathom, it can cut down on the number of meetings people have and actually make your organization more efficient?
Yeah, I think so. Here's my big contrarian take. I actually think meetings are great. Um, I think what we don't like about meetings are two things. One is we don't like all the work that comes with them, the prep work, the post work, the action items, the documents creation. And what we also don't like is being on meetings where we didn't really need to be there, right? It's like, oh, I'm on this recurring meeting. I only talk about 10% of the time. 80% of the content's not relevant to me, right? And so for the former, obviously AI, what we do with Fathom gets rid of all that, right? You don't no longer have to do all that, writing notes, action items, that sort of thing. And now what we're starting to do is focus more on that latter piece, which is like, how do we help companies have less people in a meeting? Because now you basically have this artifact. It's like, oh, you know, Tim in marketing one time needed to hear this thing. And so now poor Tim's getting stuck on this recurring meeting every week, right? Just in case something else comes up that Tim needs to hear. Well, that happens a lot, right? Especially in hybrid companies or remote companies. As the next, a meeting that should be 3 people is 10 people. Because what if someone needs to hear it? But now we've got this artifact. We've got the recording, the transcript, the summary. And so now you can uninvite Tim from that meeting. Tim will be very grateful. And, if something does come up, Tim needs to hear, you'd be like, hey, Tim, check this out, minute 5, right? Or Tim can go in and use our Ask Fathom, which is like our chat GPT, like, hey, did they discuss anything about project X, right? Great. Watch, minute 3 to minute 7. And so it really is going to allow us to, I think companies like Loom try to make meetings asynchronous by record things. It's tough because having a meeting is such a natural thing we do in New York. We're coming in a different direction, which is no, have the meeting, and the meeting itself then becomes an asynchronous piece of content you can use. So you can basically share knowledge throughout your org. And I think where we're going is everyone will eventually have an AI agent of their own that knows what things, knows that Tim runs project X, Y, and Z. And so anyone mentions project X, Y, and Z in the meeting, he's going to get a notification and get to watch that clip of the meeting, right? And follow up. And so I think we're going to get this really cool world in the next year or two where information just starts coming to you without you having to go out and seek it, without you having to sit through a bunch of synchronous meetings. And so you get to consume all this stuff kind of at your own leisure.
One area it's helped us a lot and become more efficient is around interviewing. Instead of having to have multiple people go through and interview, either group interviews, a lot of times somebody on my team will interview a candidate and then they'll send a piece of that meeting to see what they think of the candidate. And it just saves a lot of time and gets it to the point faster.
That's one of my favorite use cases, right? Because I think most candidates experience a lot of these things is oh, I had 3 meetings with this company and they asked me 70% the same questions in every meeting, right? And so now you can kind of get a quick summary, double click on a thing, and it becomes now actually each meeting feels much more, there's much more continuity, right? Recruiter meets them, they do the screen. Great, I pushed on this question. Here's the answer. You may want to double click on it, right? And all the time I'll get on with the candidate and be like, okay, I know you talked to Nick about this. Let's go deeper on that, right? You mentioned this and this and this. And I think at first you're kind of blown away, right? They're like, wait, how did you know that? It's like, you weren't in that meeting. It's like, no, yeah, we're recording it. So I think that's really it was one of our first use cases of Fathom, actually. And so it really helps that you get to ask better questions. The candidates get a better experience. And then everyone also feels more read in, right? It's not like, hey, I thought this thing was weird. Should we all look at it and see if we should ask more questions about it or if we're concerned about it? Great. You don't have to just take my word that their response was interesting or maybe not what we're looking for. You can go watch it yourself, right? And so I think it really almost democratizes a lot of those hiring decisions a bit more and makes them a little less fog of war.
I think what you said, which is very important, is it makes it a better experience for the interviewee. They're not going through the same redundant questions, and they're like, this company has their act together, right? I mean, they're communicating well. They're not wasting my time asking the same things, and they're advancing the conversation. I think that's a huge help. What's in the future for Fathom?
It's really exciting this year because only in the last 6 months of AI got to the point where it can do some of the things we wanted to do 5 years ago, right? Which is help me as a manager, as a founder, basically get insight across a bunch of meetings I'm not in, right? So, our head of success now we're beta testing this feature that's basically kind of like an AI search, right? It's an AI listening to every customer call and looking for things. And the AI understands intent and understands emotion. So he's listening for tell me every time someone gets really frustrated with something, right? It could be just that open-ended. Just someone gets frustrated on a success call. Great. He's going to get a real-time alert about that. Our VP of sales gets an alert every time there is hey, anytime there's a pricing discussion that didn't go well, right? Anytime there was an objection that we didn't have a good answer for. The AI understands what those things mean and can give you like, because no one wants to watch a whole meeting. So now what you're getting is like almost like a highlight reel at the end of the day. Here's, as a product guy, I get a lot of like, what were the big feature blockers for companies of this size, right? And so that one's really exciting. We're also looking at, last year we rolled out this thing called Ask Fathom, which is basically we saw a lot of people taking transcripts from their Fathom meetings, dropping them in ChatGPT and asking follow-up questions, right? So we kind of just build that directly into Fathom. So, I'm watching this recruiting meeting. Hey, did they discuss salary? Did they discuss work experience? And you can kind of summarize it, send you right before the meeting. Now we're going to be able to do that for your entire company. We actually did a prototype of this a week ago where we said, what's the history of like, we're trying to make a decision, like design decision on the engineering team. We said, hey, what's the history of transcription engines that we've used at Fathom? And went back over 4 years of all hands and engineering meetings. And I wrote this like 5-page document explaining summarizing every discussion we've ever had about this part of our application. Kind of mind-blowing stuff, right? We don't have to, everyone hates updating the knowledge base and all the documentation again that comes out of meetings to kind of memorialize decisions and discussions we had. Now we don't have to do that work. The AI will just, there's an AI now that's watched every meeting your company's ever had and can answer questions for you in near real time. And so I think that's going to be a huge game changer also for, short-term things. Hey, I'm on a meeting. What's the status of this project? And it's like, yeah, there's an AI that's been sitting in all the product meetings and knows the answer to that. So there's so much coming now that's only possible with kind of the AI improvements that have happened in the last 6 months or so.
I was having a conversation with Courtney on my team who runs our LX team. And one of the things, I think this is kind of tapping right into what you're talking about, is taking all of the conversations with the client from the discovery call through the completion of a program and turning it into a case study by just throwing all of the transcripts into it. I don't know if that's available yet, but I mean, that's like a perfect use case for it. And then the other one, Richard, I'm just kind of giving you my wish list here. So
Love it.
So is across companies. So if we could throw all the transcripts in across all our customers and hear what their challenges are or their pain points, it helps us really build our value prop better.
Yeah. So we actually today in the product, as of last fall, we have, you can look at a specific company. You can look at, if you are using Salesforce or HubSpot, you look at a specific deal. And we actually give you a summary for that deal. We'll also give you like a Ask Fathom for that deal or company, where you could ask it questions, right? Like, what are the top feature requests from this company, or write the case study for this company, as you pointed out. And yeah, what we're really excited about that's in kind of alpha testing now is the latter thing, which is like, it can sit across your entire org. And so each department, right? Like you point out, marketing might be asking questions that inform messaging. Sales might be asking questions that inform sales training. And so, this idea has been something we've been excited about for a while, right? If you can get 100% of your meetings into Fathom, you obviously get these really, really amazing kind of AI that really understands what's happening in your business.
Yeah. And that's the thing. You got to get them all into Fathom because, poor data or no data isn't going to get you anywhere. But if you're consistent and you run the meetings through Fathom, and eventually can make that happen. So that's awesome. As we wrap up here, what is something that you want to share with our listeners, whether it's about the direction of Fathom or as a founder, that we haven't spoke about yet?
This age of building AI products is really interesting, right? I've been building software for 20 years. And now we're, for most of those 20 years, your roadmap was just defined by what you wanted to build, right? Oh, I want to build it. Because at the end of the day, a lot of our products were just forms, or there's, they're web apps, right? Now with AI, like you have a totally different way you got to build it. It's like we're building it backwards from what's technically possible, right? And so I think that's a really important thing. And the other thing with AI is like, I think it's stress testing a lot of how people build product, because there's no good way to test for it. It's really easy to get the AI to say something, right? And so what's the difference between it saying something mediocre versus really good, right? If you're a company like us developing meeting summaries, what's the best meeting summary? Is it, it's hard to basically make a test to do that. You actually have to hire really good folks that are really diligent and read that and say, oh, this is accurate, but too verbose. This is concise, but inaccurate. And I think we're in this interesting era where like quality of output really, really matters. And I think it's also why a lot of the bigger companies struggle with producing some AI features, because they've lost that like artisanal kind of feel of like how to, sit down. Like our AI team will literally look at hundreds and hundreds of test outputs to figure out this is the right incantation of the AI models to use to generate good action items, good summaries, et cetera. And so if you're building AI products or you're someone that's consuming AI products, I think this is the number one thing to think about is If I'm buying a product, how do I test the accuracy of the output, how good it is? And if I'm building it, how do I build a team that is really incentivized to make sure we ship something that's really high quality and not just something that kind of, yeah, that looks like it, right? Like it spit out something. And so I think this is going to define the good versus great companies in the AI era.
Right, because with AI, I mean, it will answer you. It just, whether or not it's a good answer or even truthful is a completely different thing. And what I hear you saying is the importance of pushing back and being intentional, and taking it from the next level of good to great, which could really separate a lot of the companies out there who are building or producing with AI. It's going to be a game changer moving forward. So, I mean, we've had an awesome conversation. We started off talking about your journey, what you learned from other founders and mentors, and really your curiosity of what it took to get Fathom where it is now, and the direction this can go in the future. We didn't talk much about building and scaling teams, but you mentioned the importance of having a strong team and not necessarily a large team all the time, and where we're going with AI. So, Richard, I really appreciate you being here today. I'm, like I mentioned again, a huge fan of Fathom. We're going to put a link to the Fathom, of course, in our show notes. But where else can our listeners connect with you at?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. As I mentioned earlier, like some of the best things in my career have come from cold outreaches. So I try to return the favor. So if you have any questions about Fathom, feedback on Fathom, or just thoughts or questions about startup game, I'm here on LinkedIn. Happy to hear from you.
And listeners, I want to leave you with, if you know somebody who is a sales leader, a founder, or even running, I don't know, a marketing team, and they're not using a tool like Fathom, send this episode to them. There's huge value in it for them because it's a tool that we should be leveraging across the board throughout all the departments. And until next time, everybody, stay curious, keep learning. Have a great day. Thank you, Richard.
Are leading laboratories. They're incredible scientists in their own right, but they've never really sat in a program around leadership. So fascinating.